Hey, and welcome back. In this last video of the series, we are going to take the DMX lights and the LED system that you see over there on the wall, and we're going to put this together into a VJ system that we can operate on, jam on, have some fun with, and we'll end up by making a few macros, and hopefully that will give you plenty of inspiration ideas for creating your own VJ systems in GeoPix 1.0. So, jumping right into it, we have what we had the last tutorial was this scene right here. I've cleaned a few things up. I've just named some of these projectors to make it easier to figure out what's what. And other than that, everything is pretty much the same. We hop over here, we've got, just do a quick recap, we have the haze slider, which is coming from the Midi controller already, and we have the dimmer, which is coming from the dimmer slider on the Midi controller. It's just a slider I've chosen. Tilt the camera down here so you can see a little bit more of this Midi controller. And we have the shutter system, which is basically the ceiling version of the dimmer, which is being piped into those ground movers. And then down here we have the pixel frame node, and we also have a couple textures here we're not really using too much. This one we're using, this one's just hanging out. So the pix frame node, if you remember last episode, we set a few looks, and so we can go ahead and cycle through those now and just see those. And because we have a texture cycling on the actual RGB channels for these lights, we're seeing kind of a slow pulsing look. It's not a very consistent look, but we'll tweak all that later. So this is looking good. Everything's pretty much ready to go. So what we need to start doing now is adding widgets to our Perform tab. So up until this point in time, we haven't really talked too much about the Perform tab. I've bounced over here once or twice, but essentially this is just a big open blank canvas. The Perform tab is essential, though, to building a show. It's how you assemble the control interface that you're going to be using, and it's very free form. It's modular. You can build whatever you want in this grid, albeit that it's available in this list here. So the way you bring up your menus for this tab, because it's a little bit different than the others, is you right-click on the Perform label down here. And so if you close one of these windows, it goes back into Perform mode, and if you right-click on here, it takes you into Edit mode. So once we've done that, we can start placing down some widgets. So just to give you guys some example stuff, we'll fool around with some generic widgets, but then we'll also put down some system widgets, which will actually give us more specific control over various things you can do with GeoPix. So over here, we can make a single button, and we can also make horizontal sliders and vertical sliders. So let's go ahead and make a couple of these, and we'll name these a little bit better. So H slider, B slider, and we got a button here. We can name this button 1. And we can also resize these widgets, so you can make them various sizes depending on what you're using and how you want to arrange things. In addition to that, in the generic area over here, we also have a button bank. So let's go ahead and make that. And we'll just leave that as it is for now. 4 wide, 4 buttons. And then also we have something called a clip bin, which we haven't talked about either, but this is a very useful thing if you don't want to build a very complicated system dealing with the I/O. This is a very easy way to shortcut that. It's good for simple shows, and so we'll talk about that as well. So after we've talked about those, we can go ahead and dive into the system widgets, and the default layout that you kind of want to have, generally speaking, is your macro bins A and B and your crossfader. So let's go ahead and make those. I'm going to drop both the macro bin A and B and the crossfader, and we can arrange these however we'd like. I guess I'll just go ahead and put them here with the crossfader in between, and let's drop a few other things, and I'll explain what these do after the fact. So I'm going to grab the Viz component, which is basically a tool to visualize our scene. It's a lot more efficient than the editor, so this will save you a lot of frame rate instead of jumping back and forth or doing split screen. So that's good. Go ahead and stretch this and make it a little bit bigger. And we also want to drop a UV effects. This is a fun one. We haven't talked about it either, but it is quite useful, and you'll see why. In addition to that, We can definitely place down the faders widget. We're going to actually need that. And we can just place this up there, and then let's see here. We should also put down the strobe widget. We'll go and talk about that. And last but not least, we'll drop a gamma node or widget down here, and we can just leave this kind of in the corner. This is actually something we'll kind of set and forget. I guess we'll go ahead and drop a few other things out here too. Might as well. Let's drop the BPM node out here. We can go ahead and leave that right there. And then the BPM period, which we'll just put right here. Actually, we'll put this at the bottom here. There we go. Yeah, let's actually arrange these right down here, and the gamma. It can go down there on the bottom row as well. These are kind of things that we won't probably set as often. They're more auxiliary things, but they're there. And let's see if we're missing anything. That's actually just about every node in the Perform tab, the system widget, so that's great. So let's go ahead and go with that. So what we have here is a bunch of things. So the faders bin is multi-purpose. It has the master slider, which is like a kill-all slider, right? This is going to dim the value for every single channel in GeoPix, which means your red, green, blue will get dimmed, your pan tilt, your speed, everything gets dimmed. And this is a master slider, so if you put this at 50%, you actually can't take red past 50%. But you can dial it down, and then when you control the master slider, you're going to be controlling things on that scale linearly. So if you need to quickly get things back up to max, you can click max or min, and those are just shortcuts. And if you scroll here, you'll see that we have every single channel in GeoPix, and some of these are helpful to have mapped, and some of them aren't. Some of them we just want to leave these at max. So for the most part, I usually just tend to map red, green, and blue, but really it's up to you if you map others, and we'll show you how to map these to your MIDI controller here in a bit. Down below, we have the strober, and we actually haven't set up any looks yet for the strober, but we're going to do that quite soon. And then over here we have the macro bins. These are empty right now, but once we start creating macros at the end of the tutorial, we'll see these fill up, and we'll be able to trigger macros and fade between the left and the right deck, like a very traditional kind of VJ system. And then down here we have a couple of things called UV effects. UV effects are essentially modifiers that modify the coordinate system that's going behind everything in GeoPix. So right now we have these panels arranged just as we see them, but if we slide up the random slider, for example, you'll see that we slowly start to introduce noise into the coordinate system. This is a very fun effect to jam on. It lends itself well to glitchy visuals, and you can have this very kind of keyed down and slowly fade it up, or you can just jam on it. You can even hook this up to some kind of other control, so you can hook up an audio reactive node into this to have this kind of be pulsed with that. You can also hook up a MIDI control slider, which is what we're going to do to this. There's lots of ways you can rig that. And over here, or let's go down here first. You got the gamma. This is something that you can map if you'd like, but I recommend just setting it to something that looks good. Sometimes content needs to be taken down on the gamma scale a little bit for LEDs. Different LEDs are different, but I tend to use something around 0.6 to 0.7. It seems to work pretty well. And then over here we have the tap tempo, so you can tap in a tempo just by clicking here. And you have to tap quite slowly to get the tempo in accurately. But you can also dial it in, so you can just scroll with your mouse wheel and find that sweet spot. You can also just type it in if you know what the tempo is, and once you've done that, you've got the BPM period slider here, which essentially doubles or halves your effect speeds if you're using BPM based things. So all your generators in the I/O tab, which we talked about earlier, all of these nodes are actually based on BPM. So if you're using these to drive certain effects, then you will want to have this out in your Perform window, so you can quickly change this based on the drops and the build-ups and all that kind of stuff. So With that said, we have a few other things over here. We got a button, right? This button is not hooked up to anything. It's just there, and we'll hook it up in a little bit. And we have sliders for various things that we want to do. And we have a button bank. This button bank by default is not doing anything, but we will hook it up to something here. And one of our macros will utilize these custom generic widgets so that we can do some cool stuff with them live. So lastly, we have the clip bin, and this is not exactly the same as the macro bin. The macro bin is a bin full of macros, which are very complex objects that store lots of data in GeoPix, but the clip bin is literally just a clip bin. It stores video clips, and you can trigger them and bring them into the I/O tab and then route them into your projector, so that might be a good thing to start with. Because we have quite a lot of stuff going on here already, we may just want to route a very simple switcher with lots of videos and call it a day. So this might be the simplest way to rig up the LEDs behind the wall. So if we were just running LEDs, this would make more sense, but since we're running DMX lights as well, and we want to pair the visual and the DMX look on from the LEDs and the DMX looks, we want to go ahead and use a different system. But if you were just doing LEDs, this would be a good system to use. So let me show you real quick. Let's go over to the I/O tab, and let's go to widgets, and let's go ahead and find our bin, our clip bin. So here it is, clip bin 1/clip bank. So we can just place that down, and right now it's black because we don't have any content coming in. So let's go back to our perform tab. Let's right click to bring up our menus. Let's click on our clip bin, and if you scroll down the attributes, you'll see a source folder, and we just need to load a source folder that has clips in it. So I'm going to go ahead and find the folder in my computer, and I'll just pick the default one that comes with GeoPix, and you can pick a clip with more things in it if you'd like. I actually have some custom clips in here already, so let's go with this folder right here. It's going to take a quick second to load those videos. And once it does, you'll see that we have a scroll bar and a whole bunch of clips. So we can actually trigger these, and we can also trigger them off. But right now nothing's actually happening because this is not connected to any projectors. So if we go back to the I/O tab, you'll notice that we have this texture playing right here. And so let's call this, well, we can't call this anything because this is a widget. We can't name widgets in the I/O tab, so let's go ahead and source it in the LED RGB projector. And there we go. We now have content on our LEDs, and we can go over here in the perform tab and we can jam on this, and we can just switch between clips very easily. So again, if you're doing just an LED show, or even just a show based on the clip bin, you can route this to your DMX lights as well, then this is a fine way to go. But this does not have the ability to smoothly fade between looks. Actually, I take that back. This is a feature we added just recently. So we do have a smooth transition, so we can set 1 second or maybe half a second. And when you do that, you'll actually fade between these smoothly, which is actually quite convenient. So you can do that if you'd like. And you can just VJ from a simple clip bin right here in your viewport. So that's one option, but we're actually not going to use that. So I'm going to delete this node from our perform area, which is more or less to show you. And we'll go ahead and delete it from the I/O tab as well. This is now orphaned. It has no connected widget that actually belongs to it. So let's go ahead and set up our strobes. So the strobes, we set up masks for these a few episodes ago in this series, and we're going to actually use those. And so the way we get the Strobe Editor open, there's two ways to do it. You can right click on perform, and you can select the strober, and you can click opens the Strobe Editor, which will bring it up for you. Or an easier way, if you've already placed this in your perform graph, you can just go over here to tools and click on Strobe Editor, and it's going to bring it right up. So these two strobe presets are just dummies. They're built in, so you can delete one, and we can take the other one, and we can just rename it, and we'll call this Strobe 1. And so when we have this selected, you'll notice that in this channel we have red, green, and blue already selected. And what this indicates is the channels we're going to strobe on. And then over here we have masks to sequence. And this is the masks we want to use as strobe patterns. So to get started, let's just go ahead and select a single one. So if we select E1, you'll notice that we have our edge outline selected and highlighted. And that's exactly what we set up for several episodes ago. And if we turn that off and turn a different one on, you'll see that this actually looks like the next one in the sequence. And so by selecting multiple ones in the right order, you can actually create a sequence of strobes that looks quite interesting. And right now you're seeing that voltage drop on those panels that look yellow, so you can just ignore that. That's a wiring issue on my end. But once you get a strobe you like, you can just kind of let it be, and you've saved it. So I'm going to rename this again. We'll call this tunnel. And we'll make another strobe. And let's go ahead and see what this one's going to look like with the X series here. So if we do all the X series just like that, we have kind of a growing X. So let's just call this X series. And let's make a couple more, and these can be combinations of different masks. They don't have to be in the same set. So let's see what we got here. C1 looks pretty interesting, and we got E1, E2. We could throw in X1 into the mix. Let's try switching the order of these a little bit. Yeah, so we can get something cool like this. It's kind of like a tumble, right? It's like a tumbling texture of some kind. So I'm going to name this tumble. And, you know, maybe that's good. Maybe that's all we really need for our strobes at the moment. So we're going to close this strobe editor down. And over here, you'll notice that we now have those three options showing up here. And we can trigger them at any point in time just by clicking on them and holding the button down. And as soon as you release, you go back to what you were before. The override is essentially going to kill all other channels and simply blast that strobe out at max brightness, but if you want to combine that with your content, you can do an over or a multiply. And this will allow you to actually strobe over your content quite nicely. You can also do a multiply. In addition to this, there's another, we could probably tweak these to have a little bit more of an interesting impact. So these are all pure white, which is all well and good, but perhaps we want to tweak this and make it a different color. So if we go back to our strobe editor, here we have our X series. Maybe we don't want this to strobe on red, green, and blue. Maybe we just want it to strobe on blue. And so we can do that just by specifying the blue channel only, and then maybe the tunnel should be a red strobe, and then maybe tumble should be a maybe a purple strobe. And so with that in mind, we can go back here and we can switch between these and get some pretty cool looking, you know, very high impact strobe visuals going. And we can do this on several modes. And last but not least, you can actually change the speed of these strobes as well. Right now they're linked to the BPM, so if you go down to half and then a fourth, your BPM is going to speed up the actual cycle of the strobe. However, you can also just rig this up to a manual slider. So if you click this, you're going to break the BPM lock, and now you're going to be running things off of the slider. So you can go real slow, and you're welcome to do that, and you can speed it up and get even faster. And so once you have this rigged up to a MIDI controller, and we're going to do that pretty soon here, you're able to modulate the speed and trigger different strobes at the same time, and it's a lot of fun. So we're going to mess with that here in a little bit, but for now we'll just leave this BPM locked. Great. So, okay, what else do we have here that we need to deal with? We got the strober set up. We need to go ahead and start rigging our controls up to our UI, so let's go ahead and start doing that. We'll start with the faders bin up here. So we've hopped back to the I/O tab. We need to go ahead and bring out a couple things, but first let's go ahead and bring out some MIDI controls. So let's go ahead and open our MIDI palette. And let's bring out our red channel, our green slider channel slider, and then we get our blue in here as well. And that is looking pretty good. I'm going to move the shutter over here a little bit because I think we're going to need the extra space. And so let's go ahead and move these up. And before we forget what these actually are, let's rename them. So we have Midi red, Midi green, Midi blue. And so, as you can see, we have these sliders working, and that's good and all. But now we need to hook these up to our actual faders. So in order to do that, we need to go back to our widgets, roll out, and look for our faders bin, and then find the channels we wish to map. And so in this case, it's the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. And so with these out in the graph, all we have to do is hit C and enter connect mode, and we can just drag one to the other and just connect these up like so. And as you can see, once we've done that, we can now key our colors down to whatever of the three channels we want to see at that given point in time, which is great for changing the look of the show very quickly and changing the aesthetic a little bit. It's something I use quite frequently when I do shows, and I think it's probably useful for most people. However, there is one issue here. When I turn down the master fader, well, this is currently working for the lights, but what about our LEDs? Why don't we see those at the moment? We should find out. Looks like we have no texture on our default panels, so let's go ahead and put that back on. And so one of the issues we have is if we take down our red, green, and our blue sliders, we effectively kill all the brightness. But if we take down our fader, right, which should be a blackout for all color, we're actually not affecting the LEDs, we're only affecting the lights. And the reason why this is because we're not actually affecting the faders bin, we're only affecting the dim channel of those projectors. Which is a bit of an issue, but we have a way of fixing this quite easily, and once we fix it, we can pretty much forget about it. So I'm going to move these fader widgets in the I/O tab over, and since we want to use this slider to control the brightness of these, but we also want these to control the brightness as well, what we need is a multiplicative system to kind of combine these together. And fortunately, we have a node just for that. So if you open the utilities bin and grab the math node, we can just call this math red. And we're going to go ahead and combine this first, and then we'll go ahead, let's put the dimmer in the top slot and then the red in the second, and then we'll connect the output to the faders bin, and that's looking good. Now we can go and test this. Let's move our fader down, good, and we move our red down, good. Now both affect the same thing. And the reason why this works is because over here in the attributes you have your mode set to multiply by default, which multiplies the two inputs together, giving you a sum over here, and that's exactly what we need. And by the way, this node has a bunch of other cool things. You can add, subtract, multiply, divide, and also do a bunch of cool things here, which we've talked about in another video. So with that working, let's go ahead and duplicate this node and put one there, and put another one here for our blue and our green channels. So let's go ahead and rename these, get that out of the way. Green and blue, and then we can go ahead and connect these to the bottom input, and then we can connect their outputs to their widgets. And if all of that has been done correctly, we can pretty much expect these to all work for all colors now, which it does, and then dimmer will kill all brightness. So this is great. This is exactly what we want. Okay, let's make sure our haze still works. Let's pump a little bit more out into the air. So this is good. We're making good progress here. we've got our faders bin here set up. So as you see, we can control each of these with the Midi control slider, and that's exactly what we want. In the master slider, we're going to save this for an on-screen mouse control. We don't want to accidentally hit this because this kills everything. It messes with the pan tilt, so that's going to be very much on its own. The strober, that's a good thing to get hooked up next. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. First, we need to figure out which buttons on the MIDI controller we want to use, and I think that I will be using the top three right here. I'm not sure if you can see those from the video cam, but that's alright. We're going to create, first let's bring out the widget for the strober, and if we look through here, we need to find the strober. Okay, so we got strober right here, and we got lock BPM, blend mode, and strobe bank. We also have the override speed slider, which is going to be useful to us. But if you haven't noticed, there's not actually an entry for each button. There's an entry for the bank itself. So let's go ahead and click on that. And let's just go ahead and put that right here. And let's go ahead and move all of this stuff up. So when you make a strobe bank, it's useful to kind of bounce over here to the Perform tab, and you can shift-click on this to go into split screen, by the way. And click on these, and you can actually see the value changing. And if you'll notice, our value is changing from 0 when nothing is pressed to 1 to 2 to 3. So this value is not normalized. This is actually expecting a full integer value to represent which button you're pressing, and the first button is 1, the second button is 2, and so on and so forth. So in order to hook this up correctly, we need to create a multi-button input instead of the traditional single button input, and we need to make sure that this value is in the right range. Fortunately, with the MIDI bin, there is another mode over here called multi, and all you have to do is click over here, reset everything if it's not already, and press the buttons in the order you want them to be used as a radio group. So for us, I have 3 buttons, and I know which 3 buttons it is, so I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, and as you can see, we've got 1, 2, and 3 lit up here, and all you have to do is add that here to the graph. Now, as we push these buttons, we change the value here, and as you can see, we've got an integer here, we've got 0, 1, and 2. And this is actually not quite right. We have to do one more thing before this is ready to use. When you make these, its default mode is hold last, and for the strobe system, since they're momentary buttons, we actually want to make this be a momentary system, so let's go ahead and turn that off. And we'll rename this to strobe bank. And once we've done that, we can connect this to our strobe bank, and we should be able to trigger our strobes with the press of the buttons. So now this works quite well, and that's looking good. So the next thing we want to do is bring out our speed slider for our strobe speed. So let's go back to the strobe section here. Here's override speed, and let's go ahead and bring in a new MIDI device or channel, and I'm going to move a slider here, and as you can see, it's shown up right here. I'm in multi-mode, so let's reset and go back to single, and we'll put this right here. We'll call this MIDI strobe speed. And once we've made that, all we have to do is connect it, and we can twist this knob, and we'll see that value changing in real time, and we can also see it changing here. So as I hold this down, I can speed up the strobe, I can slow it down, speed it up, slow it down, and if we change our mode to override, this is a little bit more of an impacting look because nothing else is in the way, and we can just kind of jump between these very quickly and very easily, and speed it up when we get to a drop, and then speed it back down when we get to a slower part of the song. So that's my preference, to use the override speed slider, but you may want to use the BPM lock, and you're more than welcome to rig up a button to press that and get you back into that mode when you're ready for it. It really is down to you and your preference. So this looks like it's good. We're not going to rig up these. We're going to keep it simple and keep moving here. The next thing we probably want to rig up is the crossfader. This will be an easy one because it's the same as the others. We don't have anything to crossfade between, but we're going to have that soon enough. So let's go ahead and hook that up. So I'm going to move my crossfader slider here on my Midi controller, and I'm going to place that here, and I'm going to name it Midi crossfader, and then we can drop a widget, and let's find the crossfader widget. This should only be one. It's a very simple widget. Where are you? Where are you? Crossfader. There it is. So we'll put that down. Go into connect mode. We'll connect these. Looks like we're in action, so that's good to go. Go over here. You can see that crossfader moving back and forth. The next thing that we will do is rig up our fixture origin and random sliders, either UV effect sliders. So let's go back to the IO tab and let's look for these. They're at the top of the list. So we can just go ahead and click on these and add them both. And so we've got the origin and random. So let's go ahead and bring up our MIDI control again. Okay, and let's figure out which controls we want to use for this. We could use a slider, or we could use a rotary knob, and I'm not really sure what I want to do with that, but for the sake of keeping it moving, let's just use a rotary knob. These ones in the top left seem just fine, so I'll go ahead and move this one and bring that out, and then we'll move the next one here and we'll bring that out. So we'll call this MIDI origin and MIDI random, and then we can connect these the same way we've connected all the rest, and we can tweak these. And as you can see, we've got the UV effect is happening in real time over top of our content there, just like we talked about before. And this one's a little bit more subtle, but you can tell when you have different kinds of content. It basically takes an average of all of the points positions and it puts them in the middle of the average center, and you have kind of a blocky 8-bit look where every fixture is essentially using the same coordinate for its mapping instead of its own pixel coordinate. So very cool effect. Anyways, we got those things down and our collection here is growing. Let's see what else we got. We're actually going to leave the macro bins unmapped because we want to be clicking on that with our mouse. We don't want this to be embedded in our IO graph. In fact, you can't even save a macro with these things included because you would just be causing a recursion loop of macro bins, clicking macro bins, etc., etc. So the last thing that we may want to rig up eventually is this stuff over here. These are kind of our freebies, right? We can do whatever we want with these. We can use them, we can not. And so we're going to have some fun with that. But for now, I guess we should go ahead and map our MIDI controller to this, and then whether or not we use these is completely up to us. So let's go ahead and get our MIDI controller mapped up to these, and I think that'll be good for the mapping. So let's go back to the IO tab, and let's go ahead and bring up our widgets again. We're almost done here. So let's add a button, and let's add our H slider and our V slider, and we should have one more thing. I think it's just the button bank, so let's find the button bank. There it is. So we got these 4 widgets, and let's go ahead and select them and let's move them somewhere that makes sense. Maybe over here. And so we got the button, we've got the H slider, and then we've got this V slider, and then the button bank. Great, so now we just got to figure out what button we want to use for these controls. I think we should start with the button bank because it's actually going to take up several buttons. And if we actually look at this IO, this Pix frame node right here, we have 7 frames. So I think I'm actually going to tweak this button bank. So let's go ahead and right click and click on this, and let's go ahead and give this 7 cells. So down here under labels, we just have to add more labels. So B5, B6, B7. And now that we've got 7, feeling pretty good about that. let's go back over here and let's create a new MIDI multi input. So we'll go over here to the multi and make sure we reset. And I'm going to do 7 inputs, and we're going to turn that into 1 radio button. So I'm going to start over here in the bottom left, and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And once I've gotten that mapped out here, I'll just add that. And we can go ahead and reset and close for now. So we got this, we'll call this the MIDI Jam Bank. So we're going to connect this to the button bank widget, and let's just verify that this works. We do need to set this from hold last to, you know what, we may actually want hold last for this one, so let's go ahead and leave that on, and let's just verify that it works. So it seems like everything works just fine here. We can cycle through all the way to the last button, so that's great. It's exactly what we want. So once we've done that, great. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. We got the V slider, and let's just pick a random slider. Let's go ahead and pick this one next to the haze slider, and we just want to pull up our MIDI palette one more time. Bring this out a couple more times, I guess. And this will be our MIDI V slider. So that's looking good, and we need to get the H slider out here. We don't really have another horizontal slider on the board. So you know what? I'm just going to delete that, and we're going to stick with the vertical slider. So let's actually change this up real quick. Let's get rid of the H slider. Let's go ahead and move it over, and let's go ahead and name this V slider 1. This is going to break some things. Let's do another vertical slider, and then let's do another vertical slider and another one. Alright, so now we got 4 sliders. Let's go ahead and let's just stretch these out and make things look a little nicer. That one's not going to stretch quite that far, so let's just keep it its original shape. It's good. Alright, so now with these vertical sliders, let's make sure they're all named nicely. V slider 1, V slider 1, V slider 2, V slider 3. And by the way, if you name one of these things the same name as another one, you're going to get an error down here that says please correct that. You can't have 2 widgets of the same name, so make sure they all have different names. And so once we've done that, everything else is named and the same, so that's looking good. Let's go ahead and make these a little wider, just for grins. And that's cool. So now that we've got that, let's jump back over here. Just go ahead and delete both of these things. We're going to remake them, and we don't have the horizontal slider anymore, but we do have the button. So let's go ahead and rig the button up first, and let's just pick a nice, easy to find button. This one here, oh, we're going to be using that button. I think we're not using this one. Yeah, so we can use this button. We'll call this the MIDI Jam button. I know this part's a bit tedious, but it's one of those things that once you do it once, you're kind of done. You don't have to do it again. You're not building a single patch. You're building the foundation for all of your patches, essentially. So something to keep in mind. So we've got this hooked up, and that's looking good. And what's next? Now we can start bringing in our sliders, the 4 sliders that we have. Widgets, and let's see here. We've got V slider 2, 3, 4. Where's number 1? There it is. So we'll put that up there. We'll put number 2 right below it, 3 right below that, and 4 right below that. And so after that, we can go ahead and marquee these and move them over and close this and open up our MIDI area. And so we should have 4 sliders. Let's go and bring this one in. And we got the next one here. We got the next one here. I got the next one here. Alright, so now that we got those created, this should be the last ones that we need to make. Let's go ahead and rename these to Midi V1, Midi V2, Midi V3, Midi V4. And now we can just connect these up. And as you can see, we have slider control. If you hop back over here to the Perform tab, you'll see that if we move these, we are getting action on all those sliders, so this is pretty fun. And we'll see what we can do with that here in a bit. We also got the button bank, that's looking nice. And we've got the single jam button right there, and who knows what we're going to do with that, but we're going to find out soon. We got our three strobes right up here. That's looking pretty good, and we've got our strobe speed right here. It's looking good. We've got our dimmer, and we've got our red, green, blues that we can do individually. And so that's looking good. We have our fixture origin random effect modifiers. We have those working well. We have our crossfader. It looks like we're pretty much done with this mapping start, so we're going to go ahead and pause this video here and pick right back up with the next one, which is a two-parter for this last chunk of the tutorial, and we're going to go ahead and start making macros, and we're going to have some fun with that too. So alright, thanks for watching, and tune back in here in a bit when you're ready.